It was August 12, 1975, at the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans. The massive stadium, one of the largest indoor venues in the world, had been packed to capacity with 28,000 screaming fans who had traveled from across the Gulf Coast to witness what was being billed as the largest Elvis concert in Louisiana history. The humid summer air outside was thick with the promise of thunderstorms, but inside the climate-controlled dome, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation as Elvis commanded the stage with the magnetic presence that had defined his career for 2 decades. He was midway through an energetic performance when disaster struck in the most spectacular way possible. Every light in the massive facility went completely dark, plunging 28,000 people into total blackness. What happened next would become one of the most legendary moments in rock and roll history. The power failure hit without warning at exactly 9:47 p.m. One moment, the Superdome was blazing with thousands of watts of stage lighting, spotlights, and arena illumination that painted Elvis in brilliant whites and golds as he moved across the stage. The next moment, the entire facility was plunged into absolute darkness, so complete that people couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces. The silence that followed the sudden blackout was eerie and profound. 28,000 voices that had been singing along enthusiastically just seconds before fell silent as people tried to process what had happened. In that darkness, you could hear the nervous shuffling of feet, the concerned murmurs of confused audience members, and the distant rumble of thunder that suggested the summer storm outside might be related to their current predicament. For most performers, a complete power failure would have meant the end of the show. Without electricity, there were no stage lights, no microphones, no amplification systems, no way to connect with an audience spread across such a massive space. The logical response would have been to wait for emergency lighting, make announcements about technical difficulties, and hope that power could be restored quickly enough to salvage the evening. But Elvis Presley had never been accused of being logical when it came to connecting with his audiences. In the darkness, 28,000 people heard something that would be talked about for the next 50 years. Elvis's voice, clear and strong and completely unamplified, cutting through the silence like a beacon of pure sound. He began singing a capella, his voice carrying with surprising power through the vast space of the Superdome. Without microphones, without backing instruments, without anything but the natural acoustics of the domed stadium and the incredible instrument that was his voice, Elvis transformed what could have been a disappointing technical failure into something approaching a religious experience. The song he chose was perfect for the moment, a spiritual that allowed his voice to soar with power and emotion while creating an atmosphere of intimacy despite the enormous size of the venue. His voice filled the darkness with hope, turning the blackout from a crisis into an opportunity for connection that transcended the usual barriers between performer and audience. At first, the crowd remained silent, straining to hear every note, every word, amazed that Elvis's voice could carry so clearly through such a massive space without amplification. But as the song continued, something magical began to happen. People throughout the stadium started singing along, quietly at first, then with growing confidence as they realized they were participating in something extraordinary. The acoustics of the Superdome, designed for football games and large events, actually worked in favor of this unprecedented a cappella performance. The dome shape of the ceiling helped carry sound throughout the space, and the voices of 28,000 people singing together created harmonies that seemed to make the very air vibrate with music. What started as Elvis singing alone in the darkness evolved into one of the largest choirs in concert history, with 28,000 voices joining together in a display of musical unity that transcended age, race, and social class. In the darkness, all the usual divisions that separate people disappeared, leaving only the shared experience of creating music together. Emergency lighting systems began to flicker on after about 10 minutes. providing enough illumination for people to see basic shapes and movements, but not enough to fully light the massive venue. In that dim, mysterious lighting, Elvis appeared almost ethereal, his white jumpsuit catching what little light was available and making him seem to glow against the darkness. But instead of returning to his regular show format, when the emergency lights came on, Elvis continued with the a cappella performance, now moving freely around the stage and encouraging different sections of the audience to take turns singing various parts of songs. What had begun as a technical emergency had transformed into an interactive musical experience, unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. The crowd's response was extraordinary. Without the usual visual spectacle of a rock concert, the flashing lights, the elaborate staging, the theatrical elements that typically accompanied Elvis's performances, the focus shifted entirely to the pure power of music and human connection. People were crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of the shared experience. Elvis, sensing the profound impact of the moment, began telling stories between songs, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space, even without amplification. He spoke about his early days performing in small clubs where technical problems were common, about the power of music to bring people together, and about how some of his most meaningful performances had happened in the most unexpected circumstances. "You know, folks," Elvis said into the darkness, his voice warm with genuine emotion, "sometimes the best music happens when everything goes wrong. Sometimes you got to strip away all the fancy lights and amplifiers and staging to remember what it's really all about, just voices coming together to make something beautiful." The power outage lasted for nearly 40 minutes, but nobody in that audience wanted it to end. What had started as a potential disaster had become something so special, so unique, that people understood they were experiencing something that could never be replicated. This wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a moment of pure musical magic that would live in their memories forever. When the main power finally returned, flooding the Superdome with bright lights and restoring the sound systems, the contrast was almost jarring. But instead of immediately returning to his regular show, Elvis made a decision that demonstrated his deep understanding of what had just occurred. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into his newly functioning microphone, "we could go back to the regular show now. We could turn up all the lights and the amplifiers and do what you came here expecting to see. But I got to tell you, what we just experienced together in that darkness was more beautiful than anything I had planned for tonight." He paused, looking out over the crowd that was now visible in the restored lighting. "So, here's what I want to do. I want to finish this show the way we've been doing it, together, with our voices, making music the way it was meant to be made." The crowd erupted in approval, understanding that they were being offered the chance to continue participating in something unprecedented. For the remainder of the concert, Elvis performed with minimal amplification and lighting, keeping the focus on the music and the connection with his audience, rather than on technological spectacle. The result was one of the most intimate and emotionally powerful performances of Elvis's career, despite taking place in front of 28,000 people. Without the usual barriers created by stage lighting and amplification, the relationship between performer and audience became more direct, more personal, more authentic. Years later, people who were present that night would describe it as the most meaningful concert experience of their lives. They talked not about the technical problems or the inconvenience of sitting in darkness, but about the incredible feeling of being part of something larger than themselves, of participating in the creation of music rather than just consuming it. The Blackout concert, as it came to be known, became legendary among Elvis fans and music historians. It was cited as an example of how true artistry can triumph over technical difficulties, how genuine talent doesn't depend on elaborate production, and how the most meaningful musical experiences often happen when the focus shifts from spectacle to authentic human connection. Recording equipment captured portions of that evening, and the bootleg recordings became some of the most treasured Elvis performances in existence. Not because of their technical quality, the recordings were often fuzzy and unclear, but because they captured something that studio albums could never replicate: the sound of 28,000 people discovering the power of their own voices. Elvis himself often referenced that New Orleans concert in later interviews, describing it as one of the most important performances of his career. "That night taught me something about what music really is," he would say. "It's not about the lights or the costumes or the fancy equipment. It's about human voices coming together to create something that didn't exist before. It's about connection." The story of the Superdome blackout serves as a reminder that sometimes our greatest triumphs come from our apparent failures, that authentic artistry can overcome any technical obstacle, and that the most powerful music happens when performers and audiences come together as partners in creating something beautiful. Elvis Presley proved that night that his title as the King of Rock and Roll was based not on technological wizardry or elaborate production, but on his ability to connect with people through the pure power of music. And 28,000 people discovered that they didn't need flashing lights and amplifiers to experience the magic of live performance. They just needed voices, courage, and the willingness to participate in creating something extraordinary together. In a world increasingly dependent on technology and artificial enhancement, the Blackout concert remains a powerful reminder that the most meaningful human experiences often happen when we strip away the complications and focus on what truly matters: the connections we make with each other and the beauty we can create when we join our voices together in harmony.